The sharp clang of the school bell signaled the start of lunch at Willow Creek High, and the hallways exploded with the usual chaos. Teenagers streamed out of classrooms, laughing, shouting, and jockeying for position in the lunch line. In the quieter corners of the building, the muffled sounds of backpacks thudding against lockers and sneakers squeaking on tile echoed faintly. Inside room 304, Miss Evelyn Harper stacked a neat pile of graded quizzes on her desk, her gaze drifting toward the back of the classroom. One student remained seated, hunched over his notebook as though deep in thought. 15-year-old Jacob Winters sat perfectly still, his pen poised above the page but unmoving. Evelyn noticed how his faded shirt sleeves barely reached his wrists, the frayed cuffs hinting at countless washes. His sneakers, scuffed and worn, told their own story of hand-me-downs and long miles. Evelyn rose from her chair, heels clicking softly against the floor as she approached him. "Jacob," she said gently, keeping her tone light, "aren't you heading to lunch?" Jacob startled, snapping the notebook shut and shoving it into his battered backpack. No, Miss Harper," he mumbled. "I'm not that hungry." His voice was quiet, but his cheeks flushed as though he'd been caught doing something wrong. Evelyn crouched down beside him, her voice soft. "You need to eat something, Jacob. Your brain works better with food, especially after that math quiz I just put you all through." She offered a warm smile, hoping to coax one from him in return. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "I'll eat later," he muttered. Evelyn's chest tightened. This wasn't the first time she had seen Jacob linger in class during lunch. In fact, it had become so frequent she'd started to suspect the truth. It wasn't just shyness or preferring solitude. Jacob didn't have lunch money. She glanced toward the hallway, where the last stragglers disappeared into the cafeteria. Turning back to Jacob, she made up her mind. "Come with me," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Jacob blinked, confused. "Where are we going?" "You'll see," Evelyn replied, grabbing her purse and gesturing for him to follow. They walked together across the quiet school grounds and down the block to a small cafe with warm lights glowing in the windows. As they stepped inside, the comforting smell of fresh bread and simmering soup enveloped them. Evelyn led Jacob to the counter and pulled out her wallet. "Pick anything you like," she said, her voice cheerful but leaving no room for protest. Jacob froze, his shoulders tensing. I can't let you do that, Miss Harper. It's too much." His face burned with embarrassment. "Nonsense," Evelyn said with a dismissive wave. "It's just lunch, Jacob. Everyone needs to eat. Now go on." After a long pause, Jacob reluctantly ordered a sandwich and a small bowl of soup, his choices careful and modest. Evelyn watched him, her heart aching at how self-conscious he seemed. As they sat down, Evelyn tried to put him at ease. "So tell me, what's your favorite book?" Jacob looked up, startled by the question. I like science fiction, I guess," he said hesitantly. Her eyes lit up. "Really? I love science fiction. Do you have a favorite author?" Gradually, Jacob began to open up. He talked about the futuristic worlds he loved reading about, and how he dreamed of one day creating things that felt just as magical: robots, inventions, machines that could change lives. Evelyn listened intently, asking questions and encouraging him to share more. For the first time in weeks, she saw a spark of excitement in his eyes. When they finished, Jacob tried to thank her a dozen times, his words tumbling over themselves. I really appreciate this, Miss Harper. You didn't have to, and Evelyn laughed, cutting him off gently. "It's just lunch, Jacob, but you're very welcome." As they walked back to school, Evelyn felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't much a meal, a conversation, but maybe it would make a difference for Jacob, even if just for today. For Jacob, however, the moment meant far more than Evelyn realized. It wasn't just the food or her kindness. It was the way she had noticed him when he felt invisible, the way she had treated him with respect and care. That small act of kindness planted a seed in his heart that would grow in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The streets of downtown bustled with life on a warm Saturday afternoon. Market stalls overflowed with fresh produce, the smell of roasted chestnuts wafted through the air, and the melodic notes of a street musician's violin danced through the chatter of the crowd. Evelyn Harper maneuvered her way through the throng, a reusable bag slung over her shoulder filled with crisp apples and a loaf of artisan bread. This was her small weekend indulgence, a brief escape from the demands of teaching and the constant calculations of how to stretch her paycheck. The last decade hadn't been easy. While she still loved her work, the rising cost of living had chipped away at her sense of security. Unexpected car repairs, a rent increase, and the ever-present weight of student loans left her constantly juggling bills. Evelyn paused outside a coffee shop, tempted by the thought of a latte, but hesitated. It wasn't in the budget today. She sighed, shifting her bag higher on her shoulder, when a voice called out behind her. "Miss Harper. Is that you?" Evelyn turned, startled. A man in his mid-20s stood a few feet away, dressed in a crisp gray blazer and holding an expensive-looking leather briefcase. His neatly styled hair and confident smile looked vaguely familiar, but she couldn't immediately place him. "It's me, Jacob Winters," he said, stepping closer. His smile widened as recognition dawned in her eyes. Jacob. Evelyn's face lit up, her hand flying to her chest. "Jacob Winters. Oh my goodness, look at you. I almost didn't recognize you. You've grown up." Jacob laughed warmly. "Well, it's been a while, 10 years actually. I guess I've changed a bit." They stood for a moment, marveling at the unexpected reunion. Evelyn gestured toward the cafe. "Do you have time to sit for a bit? I'd love to catch up." "Absolutely," Jacob replied, opening the door for her. Inside, the smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air. Evelyn ordered a plain black coffee, and Jacob insisted on adding a slice of cake to her order. "My treat," he said, smiling when she protested. As they settled at a small table by the window, Evelyn leaned forward eagerly. "So tell me everything. What have you been up to all these years?" Jacob grinned. "Well, after high school I went to college and got a degree in engineering. Now I'm working as a project manager for an engineering firm. It's been a wild ride, but I'm loving it." Evelyn beamed, pride glowing in her expression. "I always knew you'd do great things, Jacob. You were such a bright student." Jacob's smile softened. "I don't think I'd have made it this far without you, Miss Harper. You helped me more than you realize." Evelyn waved off the compliment with a modest chuckle. "Oh, I just taught you a bit of math and bought you lunch once. That's hardly life-changing." Jacob leaned forward, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "It wasn't just lunch. It was the first time in a long time that someone noticed me, really noticed me. You saw that I was struggling and didn't make a big deal of it. You just helped. That moment stuck with me, Miss Harper. It reminded me that I was worth believing in." Evelyn's breath caught. She'd hoped, over the years, that her small gestures had made a difference to her students, but hearing it directly from Jacob moved her in ways she hadn't expected. "Thank you for saying that, Jacob," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. They talked for nearly an hour, swapping stories and laughing over memories from Jacob's high school days. Evelyn shared her journey too, explaining how she had moved to a smaller school district closer to home after the commute to Willow Creek became too expensive. "Teaching is still my passion," she said, stirring her coffee absently, "but it's been challenging lately. Budgets are tighter than ever, and well, let's just say things have been a bit of a balancing act financially." She quickly waved her hand, brushing off the topic. "Enough about me, what's next for you?" Jacob answered eagerly, sharing details about a new engineering project he was leading. But as they wrapped up their conversation and parted ways, his mind lingered on Evelyn's words. "Things have been a bit of a balancing act financially." He couldn't ignore the faint strain in her voice, or the way she had deflected attention away from her struggles. As much as she had lit up talking about teaching, it was clear to Jacob that life hadn't been kind to her. Later that evening, Jacob sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he composed an email. Subject: "Thank you." Dear Miss Harper, it was such a joy to run into you today. I've thought a lot about how much of an impact you've had on my life, not just because of that lunch, but because of the care and encouragement you always showed me. I know you said you're managing, but I've seen firsthand how much teachers like you give to others, often at the expense of your own comfort. Please allow me to show my appreciation for everything you've done, not just for me, but for all the students you've inspired over the years. Warm regards. Jacob. Jacob hit send, his heart racing. Then, using the payment app linked to his account, he transferred $2,000 to the email address Evelyn had shared during their conversation. Note for someone who gives so much. Thank you. Jacob sat back in his chair, his chest filled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the money, it was about giving back to someone who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Evelyn sat at her small kitchen table late Sunday afternoon, a cup of tea steaming beside her. The stack of ungraded essays in front of her loomed large, but her mind kept wandering. Running into Jacob the day before had filled her with warmth and nostalgia. Seeing him happy and thriving was a rare and cherished reminder of why she had chosen teaching all those years ago. As she sipped her tea, her phone buzzed on the table. Setting down her cup, she picked it up and saw Jacob's name in her inbox. Smiling, she opened the email, expecting a polite thank you or a follow-up from their conversation. What she found left her breathless. Subject: thank you. Dear Miss Harper, it was such a joy to run into you yesterday. I've thought a lot about how much of an impact you've had on my life, not just because of that lunch, but because of the care and encouragement you always showed me. I know you said you're managing, but I've seen firsthand how much teachers like you give to others, often at the expense of your own comfort. Please allow me to show my appreciation for everything you've done, not just for me, but for all the students you've inspired over the years. Warm regards. Jacob. Evelyn's smile widened as she read the heartfelt message. But before she could set the phone down, a notification popped up. $2,000 received from Jacob Winters. Note for someone who gives so much. Thank you. She stared at the screen, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears stung her eyes as she reread the words, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of his gesture. Setting the phone down, Evelyn covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. The amount was more than she earned in a month of teaching. It wasn't just about the money, it was the thoughtfulness behind it, the care and gratitude Jacob had shown. She wiped her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment settle into her heart. After a few deep breaths, she wrote back. Subject: thank you. Dear Jacob, I don't even know where to begin. Your kindness has left me completely overwhelmed in the best way possible. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you truly, from the bottom of my heart. Please know that your gesture hasn't just helped me, it's reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. You're proof that the seeds we plant in others' lives really can grow into something extraordinary. I'd love to see you again soon to properly thank you in person. With gratitude. Evelyn. A few days later, they met at the same cozy coffee shop where they'd reconnected. Jacob arrived early, sitting by the window with a book in hand. When Evelyn walked in, he stood and greeted her with a warm hug. Miss Harper. You... Evelyn, she corrected with a mock sternness, laughing as she pulled back. Evelyn, he said, shaking his head. It's great to see you again. She smiled, sitting across from him. And it's great to see you too, Jacob. But I have to say, what you did, her voice wavered, and she paused to collect herself. It was too much. Generous doesn't even begin to cover it. Jacob waved a hand, brushing off her concern. It wasn't too much. It was the least I could do after everything you did for me. You didn't owe me anything, Evelyn said softly. Jacob met her gaze, his expression earnest. I didn't do it because I owed you. I did it because you mattered to me when I needed it most. You gave me hope, Evelyn. This was my way of showing you how much that meant. They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them filled with gratitude and understanding. Evelyn's heart swelled with pride and humility as she realized the depth of the impact she'd had on Jacob's life. They spent the next hour talking and laughing, sharing more about their journeys since high school. Evelyn told him about the students she was teaching now, their struggles and triumphs, and the small mentoring program she had started for those who needed extra support. "That's incredible," Jacob said, leaning forward. "You're still making a difference, just like you always have." "I hope so," Evelyn replied. "But it's nothing compared to what you've accomplished." Jacob shook his head. "None of it would have happened without people like you believing in me. That's why I want to help now, Evelyn, because I know what it feels like to need someone to believe in you." As they left the coffee shop, Evelyn reached out and touched his arm. "Jacob, I can't tell you how much this means to me. Not just the money, but everything. Seeing you, hearing how far you've come, it's renewed my faith in what I do." Jacob smiled. "You gave me a chance when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to do the same." Evelyn returned home that evening feeling lighter than she had in years. Jacob's kindness had not only eased her financial burdens but also reignited the sense of purpose that had drawn her to teaching in the first place. For Jacob, the meeting was a reminder of how far he'd come and how much further he wanted to go in paying forward the kindness that had once changed his life. Over the following months, Evelyn Harper found herself reflecting often on her reconnection with Jacob. The $2,000 had done more than relieve her financial stress. It had given her room to breathe, both literally and figuratively. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about juggling overdue bills or delaying car repairs. But beyond the monetary gift, Jacob's gesture renewed something deeper in her belief in the ripple effect of kindness. She felt reinvigorated in her teaching, approaching each day with fresh energy and purpose. Her small mentorship program, which she'd been running quietly for struggling students, began to grow. Inspired by her conversations with Jacob, she started inviting more students to participate, offering them not only academic help but a safe space to dream, plan, and believe in themselves. One evening, as Evelyn sifted through lesson plans, she decided to email Jacob. Subject: growing something special. "Dear Jacob, I've been thinking a lot about our conversations, especially about the importance of paying kindness forward. Your story inspired me to expand my little mentorship program at school, and I'm happy to say it's starting to make a real difference. I can't thank you enough for reminding me why I started teaching in the first place. And because I know you care about this just as much as I do, I'd love to invite you to come and visit. I think my students would benefit so much from hearing your story, and I'd love for you to see the impact you've already made. Let me know if you're free in the coming weeks. Warmly, Evelyn." Jacob replied within hours, his enthusiasm leaping off the screen. Subject: regrowing something special. Evelyn. "I'd be honored. Let me know when works best for you, and I'll make it happen. I've always wanted to give back in a meaningful way, and this sounds like the perfect opportunity. Can't wait to see you again and meet the students. Jacob." 2 weeks later, Jacob stood in front of a room filled with a dozen wide-eyed teenagers. He wore a crisp button-up shirt, but his demeanor was warm and approachable. Evelyn introduced him with pride, her voice filled with emotion as she shared a little of his story. Jacob began by talking about his journey, how he'd once been a quiet, uncertain teenager sitting in a classroom not unlike theirs. He spoke about his love of science fiction, his dream of becoming an engineer, and how hard it had been to believe in himself when life felt overwhelming. Then, Jacob said, his eyes scanning the room, "Someone believed in me. Miss Harper didn't just buy me lunch that day. She noticed me, and that small act of kindness changed everything. It made me want to be better, to do better, so that someday I could make someone else feel the way she made me feel, seen, valued, and capable." The room was silent, the students hanging on his every word. He continued, sharing stories of his failures and successes, emphasizing the importance of perseverance and finding people who believe in you. He answered their questions with patience and humor, and by the end of the session, many of the students were buzzing with excitement. Afterward, Evelyn pulled Jacob aside, her voice brimming with pride. You were incredible. I could see it in their faces they connected with you. Jacob smiled, his tone modest. They just needed to hear that their dreams are possible. I was lucky enough to have someone like you tell me that when I needed it most. As they packed up the room, Evelyn hesitated, then said, I've been thinking about what you mentioned, the idea of expanding this program beyond the school. I think it could be something really special. Jacob's eyes lit up. I've been thinking about that too. I've even reached out to a few contacts at local businesses. They're interested in partnering on something like this, maybe offering internships, scholarships, or even funding workshops. Evelyn's breath caught. Jacob, that's amazing. But do you think we can actually make it happen? Jacob placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression steady. If there's one thing you taught me, Evelyn, it's that big things can start with small steps. Let's take the first one and see where it leads. Over the next few months, Evelyn and Jacob worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. Together, they secured sponsorships from local businesses, recruited volunteers, and created partnerships with community centers. What had started as a small mentorship program within Evelyn's classroom grew into a citywide initiative, a support network for underprivileged students that provided tutoring, internships, and even scholarships. At one of their first public events, a career day hosted by the new mentorship program, Jacob stood at the podium, addressing an audience of students, parents, and community leaders. Evelyn sat in the front row, watching with a mixture of pride and gratitude as Jacob spoke with passion and conviction. This program isn't just about academics or careers, Jacob said, his voice clear and steady. It's about creating a space where every student feels like they matter. It's about building a community where kindness and opportunity go hand in hand. I know it works because I'm standing here today as proof of what happens when someone chooses to believe in you. The room erupted into applause, but Jacob's eyes found Evelyn's. He gave her a small, almost shy smile, and she nodded back, her heart full. Months passed, and Evelyn found herself thinking often of Jacob, not just the incredible gesture he had made, but the way he had reconnected her to a sense of purpose. His kindness had eased more than her financial burdens. It had reminded her that the work she poured her heart into mattered. The mentorship program at her school had been growing steadily. With Jacob's gift, Evelyn had been able to purchase supplies, organize field trips, and even provide snacks for the students who stayed late to participate. Each time she saw a shy student blossom under the encouragement of their peers or a struggling teen begin to dream again, Evelyn thought of Jacob and smiled. Jacob, too, found himself reflecting on their reconnection. It had stirred something within him, a deep desire to do more. At his engineering firm, he began volunteering to lead outreach programs for young students interested in STEM fields. He shared his own story of struggle and perseverance, using it as a way to inspire kids who reminded him of his younger self. One afternoon, Jacob's phone buzzed with an email notification. He glanced at the subject line. Subject: Let's catch up. Dear Jacob, I wanted to share something exciting with you. Thanks to your support, our little mentorship program has really taken off. We've even had a few students express interest in engineering naturally. I thought of you. Would you be willing to come by and talk to them? I know they'd love to hear your story, and I'd love to see you again. Warmly, Evelyn. Jacob smiled, his mind already whirring with ideas. He replied immediately, agreeing not only to visit but also to brainstorm ways to grow the program. A week later, Jacob stood at the front of Evelyn's classroom, looking out at a small but eager group of students. Evelyn introduced him with a warmth that made him feel like he was walking back into a home he'd once known. Jacob shared his journey, speaking candidly about the challenges he had faced both in school and in life. He told them about the pivotal moment when Evelyn had reached out with kindness and how that single act had changed everything for him. The truth is, you don't have to change the world all at once, Jacob said, his voice steady and calm. Sometimes it's about one small moment, one person showing you that you matter. Miss Harper did that for me, and now I'm standing here to tell you that you can do anything you set your mind to. The students hung on his every word, their eyes wide with hope and curiosity. When he finished, they peppered him with questions about engineering, college, and how he overcame the obstacles he had faced. Afterward, as the last student left the room, Evelyn turned to Jacob, her eyes shining. "You were amazing," she said. They were completely captivated. Jacob smiled. "It felt good to give back. I see so much of myself in them, it's like coming full circle." Evelyn nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think we're onto something here, Jacob. With your experience and connections and my work with the students, we could really expand this program, reach even more kids." Jacob's eyes lit up. "I was just thinking the same thing. Let's do it." From that moment, the two became partners in a mission that grew larger than either of them could have imagined. Part 5: Ripples of Kindness. Over the next year, Evelyn and Jacob worked tirelessly to expand the mentorship program. With Jacob's help, they secured sponsorships from local businesses, allowing them to provide workshops, internships, and even small scholarships for students pursuing higher education. The program became a cornerstone of the community, celebrated for its ability to inspire hope and transform lives. Evelyn watched with pride as students who had once been uncertain of their futures began to dream boldly and work hard to achieve those dreams. At one particularly successful event, a career fair Jacob had helped organize, a group of students took the stage to share their experiences. One young girl, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger as she spoke, said, "This program made me believe in myself. For the first time, I feel like I have a future I can be proud of." As applause filled the room, Evelyn glanced at Jacob, who was standing beside her. He smiled at her, his expression filled with quiet pride. Later that evening, as they cleaned up after the event, Evelyn turned to Jacob. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "you've given me more than I ever gave you." Jacob paused, leaning against one of the tables. "I don't see it that way," he said. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me hope, Evelyn. And that's worth more than anything I could ever repay." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey settling over them. Then Evelyn smiled, a mix of gratitude and pride shining in her eyes. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Jacob nodded. "And we're just getting started." In the months and years that followed, the mentorship program continued to grow, touching the lives of hundreds of students. Evelyn and Jacob remained at its heart, bound not just by their shared mission, but by the ripple effect of kindness that had brought them together. In the end, it wasn't about the money, the program, or even the success stories. It was about the simple truth they had both come to believe, that one small act of compassion can change the world one life at a time. For Evelyn, the journey affirmed that her life's work had been worth every struggle. And for Jacob, it was a reminder that the greatest success is in lifting others up. As they stood together at yet another event, watching a new group of students take their first steps toward a brighter future, they knew that the circle of kindness they had created would continue to grow for years to come.